All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats and stepping straight into the totally fascinating world of botanical forensics. You know the feeling, right? You check on a beloved plant and bam, wilting leaves, strange spots, or maybe it's just completely collapsed. It's incredibly frustrating. But instead of just wildly guessing what's wrong, we're going to learn how to decode the actual clues. We'll be using a rock-solid foundational concept called the disease circle. We're going to learn how to methodically investigate exactly why our plants get sick, and way more importantly, how to figure out who or what is the actual culprit.
So picture this. You notice a yellowing leaf on your absolute favorite plant, and instant panic sets in. Your gut instinct? Probably to reach for the nearest spray bottle or fertilizer, right? But hold on a second. Is your plant actually sick, or is it just, misunderstood? Before we jump to conclusions and potentially do more harm than good, we've got to adopt an investigator mindset. Because a true professional diagnostic inquiry doesn't start with wild guesses. It follows a really logical progression to eliminate variables and isolate the true cause of the problem.
Listen, plant pathology really is botanical forensics. When you walk up to a sick plant, you're essentially walking up to a crime scene. And just like a detective, before we can even think about naming a suspect, we have to learn how to read that scene. Every single spot, every wilt, every weird pattern, it's a clue. But to actually make sense of those clues, we need a framework to separate the suspects. Because without a system, we might blame a bug for what was actually just a sudden temperature drop, or, blame a fungus when the poor thing was just planted way too deep.
And that brings us right to our primary framework, the disease circle. This model takes all plant problems and divides them into two massive, totally distinct camps. On one side, you've got biotic factors. These are your living suspects. We're talking fungi, bacteria, viruses, nematodes, and insects that directly infect or feed on the plant. On the flip side, we have abiotic factors. These are the non-living stressors. Think drought, extreme cold, chemical injury, or maybe a run-in with a rogue lawnmower. Now here is the golden rule of botanical forensics. Always try to rule out the non-living abiotic causes first. Why? Well, they're incredibly common. They're usually easier to fix, and ruling them out stops you from needlessly dumping chemical treatments on a living disease that literally isn't even there.
Okay, but what if your suspect is a living pathogen from that disease circle? Well, then you need to understand the disease triangle. You see, infectious plant diseases, they don't just happen randomly. For a disease to take hold and spread, three specific things have to align perfectly at the exact same time. It's like a perfect storm. First, you need a susceptible host. The plant itself has to be vulnerable. Second, the pathogen has to actually be present and active. And third, you absolutely need a favorable environment. Maybe that's high humidity, soggy soil, or warm temps that let the pathogen thrive. If even one of those three sides is missing or weak, no disease. It's a very delicate balance.
So how does this actually look in practice? We can condense the whole investigative strategy into a few key steps. Step 1, identify the plant correctly, period. Because certain plants are just naturally immune or highly susceptible to specific issues. Step 2 is describing the problem precisely. Step 3, and honestly this is absolutely crucial, is reviewing the cultural history. When was it transplanted? What fertilizers did you use? Was there construction nearby that tore up the roots? A lot of the time, just getting an accurate plant ID and a good cultural history will totally solve the mystery before you even look closely at the damage. But obviously, we do still need to look at the plant. And sometimes, you're going to see something completely crazy. Like, look at the bizarre distortion on these fruits. Is it some terrifying new superbacterium? Actually, no. It might just be fasciation, which is an abnormal growth pattern. You can see it here in a pineapple and a strawberry. In strawberries, yeah, it can sometimes be a disease called aster yellows, but it could also just be a reaction to herbicides or, honestly, a random genetic hiccup. A huge part of your investigation is figuring out what's normal or just a harmless quirk. Did you know an eastern white pine normally turns half its needles yellow and drops them in the fall? People freak out, but the tree is totally fine. So rule of thumb, don't jump to conclusions just because something looks a little alien.
So how do we look at these patterns of damage? Well, by mapping out the physical distribution across a landscape, the crime scene essentially gives the culprit away. Think about it, if the damage is super uniform across a bunch of different plants, you are almost definitely dealing with an abiotic problem, like an environmental extreme or a chemical spray. But if the damage is totally random, that's often a living pathogen riding in on the wind. What about a perfectly linear pattern of dead plants? That points straight to human error, like a trench dug through root systems. And hot spots, little clusters of sick plants, that usually means a living pathogen is slowly spreading outward, or maybe you've got a really localized soil nutrition issue.
Another absolute game changer of a clue is the timeline. Abiotic damage, it almost always appears suddenly. We're talking lightning strikes, a weird overnight frost, herbicide drift, boom. The damage happens, it appears fast, and here's the kicker, it doesn't spread to new leaves over time. Living pathogens, though, they cause spreading infections. They're polycyclic, which basically means they go through reproductive cycles over days or weeks. So you'll see progressive damage that slowly, steadily gets worse and spreads through the whole planting.
And we can apply that exact same logic to the individual plant itself. If you're looking at a plant and the entire thing is uniformly suffering, like the whole canopy is wilting or yellowing all at the same time, it's highly likely the root system, the lower stem, or the immediate environment is compromised. The plant literally just can't pull up water. But if you're seeing random spots just on the above-ground parts, maybe just one branch or a few scattered leaves, you are much more likely dealing with an airborne pathogen or some pest that just landed and decided to start snacking.
All right, to really level up our detective skills here, we absolutely have to nail the difference between two critical terms, symptoms and signs. A symptom is simply the plant's physical response to a problem. Wilting, yellowing leaves, stunting, dead spots, those are all symptoms. It's the plant basically waving a flag saying, hey, I'm under attack. A sign, on the other hand, is the actual physical evidence of the pest or pathogen itself. This is your smoking gun. It could be the insect itself, cast skins, bug droppings, which we call frass, or the fuzzy little spores of a fungus.
Let's take a look at some classic symptoms first. Fungi are by far the most common horticultural pathogens out there. When they attack leaves, they typically create these really clearly defined circular dry lesions with distinct borders, just like you see here. Sometimes the centers even look dry and papery. And as the fungus spreads outward, it can produce these crazy concentric target rings inside the spot. When you see that, it's a massive clue pointing directly to specific fungal pathogens, like Alternaria, which is the notorious culprit behind early blight in tomatoes.
Now contrast those nice circular fungal spots with the blocky, angular spots we have right here. These are caused by bacteria or foliar nematodes. Notice how they're not perfectly round at all? That's because bacteria and nematodes literally swim around inside the leaf tissue, but they get trapped by the plant's tough leaf veins. They can't easily cross those barriers, so they hit a wall, which leaves you with these highly distinctive, angular patterns and streaks.
And then we have symptoms like blight. Blight is kind of a broad term, but it usually means a really rapid, devastating death of plant tissue. Just look at this flat of impatiens. The insanely fast spread and total utter collapse of these plants is caused by a fungal pathogen called rhizoctonia. It races through the soil via tiny fungal threads, rotting the stems right out and causing a sudden, totally catastrophic failure of the entire plant. It's brutal.
Okay, let's pivot for a second and examine signs. Now, this is where things get a little bit gross, but undeniably fascinating. Remember, signs are the physical pieces of evidence the pathogen literally leaves behind. Take a look at the fruit shown here. That bright orange, totally alien-looking stuff bursting right out of it, that is a sign. It's the actual reproductive structure of the cedar quince rust fungus. It's sitting there producing millions of spores right on the surface, just waiting to be carried off by the wind.
But we've got to remember, a ton of signs are entirely microscopic. What you're looking at here is a microscopic view of fungal spores. Sometimes the sign is just a tiny droplet of bacterial ooze on an apple stem. And get this, a single drop of ooze from the fire blight bacteria can pack in more than 1 billion bacterial cells. They're just sitting there, waiting for one splash of rain to launch them onto the next susceptible host in our disease triangle.
All right, here is a fantastic pro tip for diagnosing a plant that's wilting even when the soil is completely wet. You need to check for vascular discoloration. If you cut a cross-section of the stem right near the base of the plant, you might spot these hidden brown or black streaks inside. In plants like tomatoes, it forms a dark ring right around the center. In grasses, it looks more like scattered dark polka dots. Seeing that discoloration is proof that pathogens, like verticillium or fusarium wilt, have quite literally clogged up the plant's internal water plumbing system. No wonder it's wilting. So, let's bring this whole thing together into our official plant detective checklist. Whenever you're faced with a sick plant, just lean on the framework. Number 1, always rule out those non-living abiotic stressors first. Check the watering, the weather, any recent chemicals. Number 2, check the disease triangle. Is the current environment actively favoring a pathogen? Number 3, zoom out and observe the landscape patterns. Is the damage uniform, linear, or completely random? And finally, carefully differentiate between the plant's symptoms and the actual physical signs of whatever's attacking it, because methodical observation is really the only way to avoid useless, potentially harmful treatments.
At the end of the day, plant pathology is this incredible mix of science, observation, and deduction. You absolutely don't need to memorize every single bug or fungus out there. You just need to know how to read the clues they leave behind. So I'm going to leave you with this. Based on the disease circle and the forensic framework we just dug into, what suspects might be lurking in your garden right now? Go ahead, step outside, take a really close look at those leaves and stems, and see what mysteries you can unravel. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy sleuthing!